Kia ora koutou katoa, ka mihi nui kia koutou. My name's Nathan Wallis, no Ngāpuhi aho, or Taupo Timarai, and I'm working tonight with all of you guys and in partnership with NIB Insurance. So we've been working together for over a year now, in partnership, trying to bring research-based strategies to help you, the parents, and the carers of children. And yeah, we've made lots of resources together. You can check out the webpage, nib.co.nz. Follow their Facebook page and make a like there. There's lots of resources. We've made little clips trying to answer lots of your most commonly asked questions. So, yeah, well, I also worked with NIB to do a parenting poll from our last lockdown. Some of you participated in that survey, and that was really helpful. That was a nationwide survey seeing what the actual impact was. And that helped to inform us a little bit, actually, about how to respond this time. So, yeah, tonight we've got Serena from NIB. She's in the background on the video call, and she's going to be collating all of your questions that come in. We've got your the questions that you sent in previously, so thank you for doing that. And we've got them ready to go at the start, but Serena's going to be in the background collating your questions tonight, so we hope to answer them in the last half. Okay, I think we should start with the karakia then. Let's now do it properly, start with the karakia. Yeah, this is a karakia written by a friend of mine called Solomon Rahui. And it talks about every child accessing from the cradle to the grave all the love that they need. Mai te pō, ki te ao. Mai te ao, ki te pō. Ko te tūmanako, ka taia e tamaiti, I tīmata ora rawa atu I te ao toro ane. Mai te pō, ki te ao, mai te ao, ki te pō. Kia ora koutou. Okay, so I think that's covered the basics. Let's get to what we're here for, which is to answer your questions. So I've got some notes here in front of me because I prepared earlier, but let's just launch right into that. Serena, have you got our first question for us?
Yeah. So the first question is, some parents asked, how do you teach children to self-regulate and control their emotions instead of having a meltdown? What can parents do to help them through these major bursts of emotion, for example, extreme anger or sadness?
Right. I think it's a really good question to ask because self-regulation and the child's ability to sort of calm themselves and self-regulate themselves is the number one factor in determining how well a child does in their lifetime outcomes. So it's a good question to ask. Part of our children not losing their rag, I suppose, is us not losing our rag, so we can't model it in the first place. So model those good self-calming techniques yourself. I really think it's about using the child's frontal cortex as well. That's a part of their brain they're going to use to regulate their emotions. So you have to exercise that. So let your child make choices. You know, rather than say to the 2-year-old, right, it's snowing, wear your blue jersey, it's better to say to the 2-year-old, okay, it's snowing today, would you like to wear your blue jersey or your green jersey? Making those choices and really helps in a child's ability to learn to self-regulate. But largely, I'd say, think of self-regulation and the child's ability to learn to calm themselves as being like an apprenticeship. You know, there's not genes that just kick in that allow the child to self-regulate. They really have to be taught how to do that. So what that means, that's why I say it's like an apprenticeship. Because for a start, they don't really know how to do it, and you've got to do most of it for them. But then generally, over time, once you've done that repeatedly, the child will start to learn to do it for themselves. So for example, if the child is, you've asked for a biscuit and you've said no, it's nearly tea time, and he's about to have a meltdown, one of the strategies that we as adults use to avoid a meltdown is distraction. We think of something else. But the child's got to be taught that. So when he's about to have a meltdown because you won't give him the biscuit, you might say, remember we were building that pirate ship out of your Lego last night. Let's go and finish building your pirate ship, and before you know it, it'll be tea time, and after tea you can have a biscuit. It's just that doing that once is not going to teach him the art of distraction. You're probably going to have to do that 100 times with him before he really knows how to do it by himself. So there's no way of avoiding that hard work. You know, you have to get in. I sort of think you're doing 99% of it for a start, and the next time you're doing 98%, the next time you're doing 97%, and after 100 times your child will know how to do it. That's really the way to teach self-regulation. Kia ora.
Awesome. So the second question is from Anna. She says, we have an almost 3-year-old who doesn't listen when told not to do something and even appears to purposely do things when asked not to. We try to explain that his actions are wrong, but he thinks it's a joke even when we appear angry. Mm-hmm. How can we discipline this behaviour?
Oh, well, I think you've got a very intelligent little 3-year-old there. He's doing exactly what he's supposed to be doing at 3, which is working out, how do I start to exercise some control on my world? And so he practices that with mum and dad by saying no. So really it's very age appropriate. You explaining it to them why he's not allowed to do it is a good strategy because it teaches him language. And once you've explained that 100 times, he might have some idea of what you're talking about. But basically, I wouldn't expect it to work at 3. I think you spend the whole time explaining it at 3, and then that works at 4. It's just a difficult period. The child's challenging boundaries. I'd say the first thing you can do to make it easier is remove anything that is not necessarily there. If you're fighting lots about the television remote, put it up higher. If you're fighting about don't touch the pot plant, put that up higher for now. It'll be easier to teach him those boundaries once he's got a little bit older, a bit more cognitively advanced. There'll be some things that you can't move up higher, so those will be the things that you have to challenge them over. So when they do touch those things, you don't want it to be successful. The things that you've got left, if you've said no, don't touch that. Actually, I wouldn't recommend saying no, don't touch that. It's more effective to tell them what they can touch. So try and avoid no, don't touch that, and say if the child's pushing the buttons on the television and you don't want them doing that, then give them something and go, here you go, you can push the buttons on that. It's much easier to redirect their behaviour than it is to say no, don't do that. Once you've redirected their behaviour, try and stop their ability to do that. Again, use distraction. If he's challenging you about the buttons on the television and you can't put the television up higher, try distraction and really move him into that distraction yourself so that he's not successful with the buttons. Distract him into something else. They're quite easy to distract. And just accept that it's normal and actually a sign that your child's intelligent, so nothing to worry about.
Stacey asks, how can I support a 13-year-old who has social anxiety and turns to social media for affirmation instead of her friends? She once loved school, but now wants to be homeschooled.
Yeah, that's a difficult one. She's 13, so she's entered adolescence. So we would expect things to start getting a little bit more difficult. Adolescence is really about the parts of your brain that control your emotions, see things from other people's point of view. Those things shut for renovations for about 3 years. So it's typical that we see a rise in things like anxiety and depression as teenagers. Some of the things that the research tell us can really be effective and help with things like social anxiety. It might be not what you think. It's the number one thing that helps with that, according to the literature, is yoga, the practice of yoga. Yoga really strengthens this thing we call the vagus nerve in your system. It's like the highway of stress in your body. Your vagus nerve connects your brain and your heart and your lungs. And if you've got good vagal tone, then you find it easier to calm and regulate yourself and manage things like social anxiety. Without very good vagal tone, then those sorts of things can take over. So yeah, we know that yoga is really good for improving your vagal tone. And that might be something that you have to do with them, or maybe they really don't want you to do with them, but try and facilitate. That's one thing you can do from the literature. I'd also talk to the school counsellor. If you're worried about your child having social anxiety, there is people at the school that can help and support with that. And if you and the teachers are on the same page, there might be something they can do and you can do in partnership, to help. I understand your pressure about her turning to online things all the time and not having real friends. And you're right to be concerned about that because, we used to say that basically the kids who are going to end up having, most likely to have problems, are not the kids who do social media and have face-to-face friends. It's the children who do social media instead of face-to-face friends. So you're right to try and encourage those face-to-face interactions. Maybe she's got some friends that she does like and that and they're good influence, that you could facilitate reconnecting with those friends, arrange for sleepovers and do what you can to make it easy for her to see those people, so that you're encouraging that face-to-face interaction. Yeah, and think about, she got cousins and people that she does socialise with, and think about, getting them to come and stay for the weekend, so she is getting a chance to face-to-face interact. I don't think you're going to be able to get rid of the online stuff, because it's a part of their world. But what you can do to protect her is to have a 2 hours device-free time every day. I'd recommend all parents do that because the children that come from homes where the parents have 2 hours, the whole family has 2 hours device-free. That might be between 5 and 7 when you're cooking tea and stuff, but the kids don't have devices. That's all their brains need, that 2 hours a day during wake time, device-free, to sort of facilitate all of the good benefits that we've got from mental health. If those children come from a home with 2 hours device-free, they're outside the risk group of children having anxiety and depression. So it's one of the things that we can really protect them from. Also, if you're giving her 2 hours device-free time a day, there's 2 hours where she has to find something else to do other than go online. So that will encourage her also to reconnect with friends. So yeah, I'll try those strategies.
Great. Lisa says, I'd love to know how to best build resilience in a 4-year-old who likes to do everything right the first time.
Okay, yeah. That's, unfortunately, when we're saying to little children, what colour is this, what number is this, what comes after that, we can sort of encourage this black and white thinking, this idea that there's a right and a wrong answer. And it does kind of, create exactly what you're talking about, where the child wants to get it right the first time. We know from the literature that's a precursor to anxiety and depression as a teenager. This black and white thinking, perfectionism, must get it right the first time. And it's actually relatively easy to break at 4. It's all about creative, open-ended play. Creative play means doing things that there's no right and wrong answer to. That's what really facilitates resilience in this age. That's what really facilitates intelligence and gets us away from that black and white thinking. That there's just, puzzles are kind of black and white. There is just one way to do a puzzle. Whereas Play-Doh, there's no right way to play with Play-Doh. There's no right sculpture to make. You can make anything you like. I mean, Lego is, often considered one of the most intellectually stimulating toys on the market, and a lot of that is because it's open-ended. It's not preset how you will use it. Building huts in the lounge out of blankets and cushions and stuff is a creative pursuit that hasn't got a right-wrong answer. We call them open-ended, so that there isn't one particular outcome, that there's a whole array of outcomes to come from. Creative play. Generally, if you do child-directed play, helps too. Letting the child, whatever idea they come up with, trying to build on that idea and extend on that idea. If the child's invested in the play and they've initiated what the play is, there's much more chance you'll get them involved in extending them. Try and avoid asking them right and wrong answers, getting them to perform. They've already got that black and white thinking, so don't, just because they know what their name starts with, don't ask them what their name starts with, because you're reinforcing that thinking. Instead, I would be asking lots of questions that don't have right and wrong answers. Have some of those up your sleeve from the dinner table so that you can discuss those things, to be able to say, so what do you think the tooth fairy looks like? Because there is no right wrong answer to that. So a child that is, that's immersed in creative play will be able to give you a big, long, detailed explanation of how they think the tooth fairy looks like. The child that's had that black and white thinking is forever trying to find out what you think the right answer is, so they can tell you what the right answer is. So, that's a good way of identifying, and just, like I say, have some up your sleeve, ready for the tea table, so that there are open-ended questions. Some that worked for my kids, we had big discussions about, they always want to go, what would you do if you won lotto? That's the most predictable one. But I'd ask things like, well, you guys, when you're growing up, we don't know what your job's going to be when you're an adult, so when we have to educate you, we have to just sort of get you ready with what we call key competencies, because we don't know, your job hasn't been invented yet. But Santa Claus was always going to be Santa Claus. That was his job. So what do you think Santa Claus should have been taught when he was at school? And there's another whole conversation around that. So, it's those open-ended conversations that take you away from that black and white thinking and will build that resilience. So, there's some strategies.
Awesome. So this is for parents of teenagers. Arana asks, how do you guide a heartbroken teenage son? They've known each other for nearly 4 years and were together for almost 2. I've let him know I'm here and if he needs anything, but what can I do beyond this?
I think it's great that you have let him know that you're here and you're there if you need him. It is a big topic because, they're very at-risk boys, teenage boys. They're the ones that fill up a lot of our suicide statistics, and a lot of it is often around heartbroken things. So it is good that you've made yourself available, and I would really validate his feelings. I think, men, surprising to a lot of people, men have a larger amygdala than women do. So that suggests they feel emotion even stronger. Might suggest why they have such a high suicide rate. But don't invalidate it by sort of saying, oh, it's just puppy love. I remember my mother said that, heartbroken. I was completely heartbroken, thought I was never going to fall in love again in my whole life. And mum, trying to be helpful, says, oh, it's just puppy love, Nathan, you'll be fine. What that told me was, you don't get it. She's dismissing it as not being important, and it's actually the most important thing that's ever happened to me. This I thought at the time. So don't invalidate it like that. Talk to how important it is. And say, when you validate it and say, I remember feeling that way, and you must be absolutely heartbroken, and you've been together for 2 years, validate those emotions, and then give them a strategy. So, you must be devastated, you poor thing. I remember how I felt at that age. I know you were so close, you were such good friends, must have come as such a shock. If you just hang in there, try and get through the next few weeks. These things do ease a little bit with time. Nothing's going to take away the pain, but it is going to get a little bit, less stressful with time. Mum and Dad are here to support you. I think this is the time when you do bake their favourite cookies and and or make their favourite meal and really look after them and nurture them. It's a difficult thing. Maybe even, I mean, you're at lockdown, that might be the perfect time because you're actually around and available. But if you're not in lockdown, and I think this is the sort of time, this is the sort of thing I think it is worth taking a day's leave and staying home, and being there for them on that day and saying, I've taken a day's leave because I'm worried about you. I know this is a really difficult time and a difficult thing for you to go through, and so I'm here the whole day if you need me. There's a good chance as a teenager he'll want to ignore you completely for the whole day, but they want to know that you're there and around and available so they can completely ignore you. It's just the irony of being a teenager, but it means a whole lot that you are there in the background. So yeah, just nurture and validate, but reassure him that after you've validated that things will get better.
Great. Now, several viewers have asked about violent tendencies. So, Nathan, how do you manage a child who is often hitting, scratching, or pushing others, either for attention or when they don't get their way? How should the approach vary for different age groups?
Yeah, I mean, it is a very, very different question if we're talking sort of under 5 than we are starting to talk over 5 and talking into adolescence. When an adolescence is hitting in comparison to an 18-month-old 2-year-old who's hitting. So if we start off with that 18-month-old 2-year-old, that sort of younger age group, it's not really a misbehaviour when they're hitting. They don't have a frontal cortex yet. They don't have empathy to the same extent we do. So quite literally, when I tap you on the head, I know it feels exactly the same as if I got tapped on the head. A 2-year-old does not know that yet, so telling them off is fruitless. What they're probably trying to do, rather than see it as a misbehaviour, see it as an undeveloped social skill. Oftentimes in these situations what I see is the child is actually just trying to get attention and is trying to initiate social contact. He doesn't yet know the skills of going up to someone and saying, oh, you look interesting, do you want to come and play with me? He's got to develop those skills. And for a start, it usually starts out as just reaching out and whacking someone. Because it's like, oh, well, you're doing nothing, you're not very animated, or whack, oh, look, now you're all animated and we're involved in an interaction. So it can really be as innocent as that. What I would do is give them an alternative, show them another way of doing something. If they're reaching out and trying to hit someone's face as an 18-month-old, then maybe you say, be gentle, don't tell them what not to do. Say, be gentle, gentle hands, and would you like to play? Or give them an alternative. If they're reaching out and hitting another child, rather than telling them off, I would gently redirect that behaviour by giving them a toy and saying, here you go, why don't you give the toy to the other child? And you're giving them an alternative way to initiate social contact that way. I think with young children like that, it's absolutely a waste of time to approach it as a misbehaviour and to tell them off and to say no, because they're not really misbehaving and that negativity is not going to help their development. So yeah, see it as a pro-social thing. Quite different once you're getting up the age groups though. You've got a real problem, I think, even if your 5 or 6-year-old is hitting you. That's a problem. So I think you'll need more help than just a one-off answer if it's got to that stage where the 5 or 6-year-old is lashing out. I think you need to get a little bit more, support. The older they are, and if they continue to be violent, then I think you need to reach out and get more help, than a forum like this. Talk to if the school's got a counsellor, talk to the teacher at school. There's helplines that you can ring. It's a difficult one because if the child's getting violent towards the parents, the first thing the parents can do is make sure that they're not reinforcing that violence themselves by using sort of violent parenting techniques. You want to be using peaceful, resolution-focused and relationship-building parenting techniques to counteract that aggression in the child. We won't automatically assume that the child's doing something wrong. It could be the child is calling out. It's all behaviour is communication. So what is the communication that's behind that behaviour of the child lashing out physically? And it's usually frustration, being overwhelmed, feeling like their voice is not heard. So one of the proactive things we can do is to give them a chance to have their voice heard before they feel like they need to lash out and become violent. So I advocate this thing I call a mate date, which I sort of think every parent should dedicate 10 minutes a week to doing this for their child. You can go on to, follow the NIB Facebook page. There's links there to doing the mate date on YouTube. We'll give you detailed instructions. But really, it's just about 10 minutes a week where we stop being parent and we hang out with the child and we let them be in charge. We're not allowed to interrupt. We're not allowed to tell them anything different. We just have to be quiet for 10 minutes. It's very hard for children to express themselves, and so we need to give them that space to express themselves. If you think about it, when was the last time that your child got uninterrupted 10 minutes to express how they feel about something. Because if you're like me, you'll be like every other parent who can't help yourself, but you'll probably interrupt after about 25 seconds to tell them why they're wrong and how it actually is. So, and that's fine for the normal day life, because that's what we do as parents. We are there to guide them, you know. But yeah, if having that 10 minutes a week where they can express their voice and really express how they feel about things without any consequence, I think will really mitigate that need to have to lash out at other times. So try that as a technique. If that's not working, seek additional help.
Awesome. So Rachel would like to know how to teach empathy to an 8-year-old child.
Yeah, empathy is an interesting one because it develops in stages. It's never too late to learn empathy, but a lot of what we think of as empathy, the neural pathways laid down for that, are really laid down in that first 1,000 days of life by having an empathetic, caring, responsive carer. So the more attuned you are to your infant in the first couple of years of life, and the more responsive you are to them, then there tends to be the better foundations laid down for empathy. There is some empathy that comes through your temperament and genes, so it's always a combination of your genes and what happens in the early environment. But if we get to 8, we're trying to teach empathy. I mean, it's different if we've adopted the 8-year-old and we don't have a previous relationship, if we're talking about our own 8-year-old. But generally the answer is going to be, teach them empathy by being incredibly empathetic. That means you have to exaggerate your empathy and so that you're modelling it all the time. So when they're, feeling a bit off and the most they can offer is a grunt, then they're not able to express themselves, so you start to help them with words. Oh, it looks like you're feeling a bit overwhelmed or frustrated. Is there anything I can do to help? Yeah, model that you're picking up on their cues, on their facial expressions, even talk about where it might feel in their body. You know, sometimes when I'm upset and grumpy, I can feel it in my tummy. So maybe you're feeling something in your tummy. Sometimes people feel it in their back. Encourage them to feel the sensation of the emotion in their body. Encourage them to put words to it. Model being empathetic with them and do it in front of other people as well. You know, so your partner gets home from work, so be especially empathetic to how their day was and make sure that you're reflecting that back, so you're really immersing the child in an empathetic environment. Use pro-social parenting strategies. You're not going to get a very empathetic child if you just use timeout or confiscation or grounding and go to your room and do those punishment type things. They're the opposite to being empathetic, and so they don't help to teach your child empathy. You can get all the benefits that you get from consequences using pro-social parenting techniques that will enhance empathy. So, yeah, go for that. It's really just being very empathetic. Children do as you do, not as you say. So they won't be empathetic because you tell them to. They'll be empathetic because they see you doing it all the time.
Great. So Chris says, I'm worried about the impact lockdown will have on my 3-year-old socialization skills. Is there any research to advise on a good age to start kindy or any other tips I should be aware of?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wouldn't be too concerned about your 3-year-old's socialisation skills, really. What a lot of people are not aware of is that socialisation skills are developed in the child for their peers between 3 and 6. So starting them before 3 with their peers, as they go into daycare, doesn't improve their social skills. So actually, like when we measure social skills in 4-year-olds, the social skills who have the 4-year-olds who have the best social skills are the 4-year-olds that didn't start any form of childcare until they were 3. So the longer you're at home in a one-on-one relationship, the better your foundations for social skills. So your child being at home when they're 3 and having mum or dad one-on-one is actually probably going to be really good for their socialisation. It might be more of an impact if they were 4 or 5. But even then it's only 6 weeks. So in the context of everything, as long as you're, which I imagine you are, playing more with the child because you're in lockdown, then that's probably going to give him all the socialisation that he needs right now. What the research tells us is that the benefits you get from early childhood education between the ages of 3 and 6 are accrued in a 2 to 3 hour session 4 times a week. So that means if you make it a 5 times a week, no more improved benefits, they top out at 4 days a week. If you increase the session to 3.5 hours, it doesn't get any better after 2.5 hours, the benefits top out at 2.5 hours. Whereas the benefits under 3, there are no benefits. So, it's not a danger zone for your child. 6 weeks won't matter, just keep doing what you're doing and play with the child more often, and I think they'll be fine.
Great. So Sharon says, my 11-year-old is super anxious about anything new, for example, a school camp or a new teacher. How can I help them with these anxiety-based issues as they move to intermediate level schooling?
Yeah, it's a growing concern for lots of parents, anxiety and depression and things like lockdown, adding a risk factor. That doesn't help. We tend to look at things like anxiety, depression, any sort of mental health issue in terms of risk and resilience. Risk are all the factors that make it more likely that issue will manifest, and then resiliency factors are the things the literature tells us make those things less likely. So, when you talk about approaching intermediate school, I think for a child with anxiety that doesn't like new experiences, ideally they would stay at primary school for those 2 years and not go to an intermediate. So there's a continuation of the same relationships that they've had before, so they get to cognitively mature a bit before they have to deal with the sort of grown-up aspects of high school. The difficulty with them not liking new relationships in intermediate is going to be introducing new relationships for 2 years and then introducing other relationships. In some ways that is the purpose of an intermediate, to act as a transition zone before you get into the big scary high school. So I think one of the things you can do to make this easier is maybe talk to the counsellors and the people at school about your daughter going to the school, so they're aware of that. That can make them, make sure she's with a particularly nurturing teacher, or, it can help. They can help to put in place strategies. Again, the yoga we talked about before, that's going to help, because that ability to calm the anxiety you can do through yoga. You get some of the same benefits through meditation, but you seem to get all of those and more with the practice of yoga. So try that. Let me just refer to my notes here. Yeah, if we're going to a school, I'd look for a school that's going to be slightly smaller if possible, and that's going to be really focused on less teacher changes. So, a school that might have one teacher appointed when they start at the school, and that person remains as their form teacher or homeroom teacher right through. So there is someone there nurturing that social emotional well-being as well. Yeah. Rather than a child that's already got social anxiety, I would be hesitant about putting them into a great big school focused on academic outcomes, because that can be a recipe for disaster. So, yeah, if my child was showing some signs of anxiousness, then I'd be choosing their school based on their ability to look after their social emotional well-being. One of the things that we could do is this process of validating their emotions. When you're overwhelmed by your emotion, someone saying, "Oh, don't be silly, what you should do is this," doesn't help, because it's negated. So the opposite to negating is to validate. So when they're going, "Oh, I'm really scared because I'm going to have a new teacher," then you validate by saying something like, "Yeah, it is quite scary when you don't know what you're going to expect and you don't have any predictability," so they understand you're hearing them. And then you provide the strategy. You might say, "But I remember last time that you got that relief teacher, and he, come in the Batman costume, and he was really cool, and you had a blast all day." And talk about previous times when they've met that challenge and they've used some strategies and they've been successful. And reinforcing that. Yeah, it's generally that's a good way to raise children in general and respond to them. It's validation, cognitive training. Validate the emotion that's coming from behind what they're doing. Because being a child is an incredibly emotional experience. It's 90%, 90% emotion, about 10% logic. So validating that emotion first to calm that emotional brain is really important. Yeah, I know those things can be really scary, but follow up with a strategy. Have you tried, when I get scared, I make sure I breathe deeply and slowly into my belly. And just taking a big deep breath, can often help. The literature talks about this 6-4-6 method. Breathing in on the count of 6, out on the count of 4, and on the count of 6, out on the count of 4, and just repeating that. Nice simple strategy, helps calm that whole central nervous system. So there you go. There's some strategies you can try. Kia ora.
Great. What is your advice for helping an unmotivated child who loses focus very easily and is therefore struggling at school?
Unmotivated child who loses focus very easily. They're probably bored with what they're doing. They're probably something that's, that hasn't been chosen so much directly for that child's personal interest, and is a task that they have to apply themselves to do and focus their attention. Depending on the age of the child, we might just have an unrealistic expectation about, how much focus they should be having. Did we get their age at the start of that question, Serena? Did I remember 5 years old? Or did I imagine that?
No, there was no age for that one.
Yeah. Okay, well, yeah, first that then. Maybe you've got an unrealistic, 5-year-olds don't focus their attention for very long at all. If you do want their child to focus their attention, it's not about making them do it. It's more about helping them to do it. So I would choose something that that the child might like, and then do it with them in order to maintain their focus on something. I mean, a giant puzzle is one of the obvious ideas. If you can set up a room somewhere, a space somewhere where you can be coming back to that puzzle, and then the child will want to do it if you sit and do it with them. If you dedicate 20 minutes every day to come in, or you only 40 minutes, whatever the time, every second day, whatever you can do, just sit with the child, do the puzzle, make it enjoyable, and keep his attention focused on that and not distracting anything else. That's how you will generally extend out their focus of attention. It's not something we can just leave them alone or tell them to do or punish them into doing. It's again a wee bit like that apprenticeship. And there's way more chance they will focus their attention if, number one, you're helping them, and also number one, that they get to choose what it is. You know, I'd avoid video games and things on the computer because it's too easy to focus your attention then, just because of electronic screens. But you know, a game of Jenga, you know, the tower blocks where you have to stack in order to, you know, if the kid's doing something with you, they're enjoying it and they're focusing their attention almost without knowing they are for a long period of time. The other strategy I'd do is to make sure you are giving them some responsibility. You know, something that they're sort of exercising leadership in over the house and they've got responsibility for. Because a child that has given responsibility and treated in that way tends to, you know, rise to your level of expectation. So that can be a good thing to do too.
Great.
Oh, can I add in there, sorry? Another thing I saw in my notes, a good way to do that for any parent is, a good trick I've found, is to talk as if the child can already do it. You know, when I hear parents saying in front of their child, oh, he's just useless at focusing his attention, you know, I can't get him to do it, you know, after 2 minutes he's distracted, he's just got no hope. The child is building up this idea that, I can't focus my attention because that's what you're telling them. I could equally say for exactly the same child with the same behaviour in front of him, in earshot, saying to someone else, he knows how to focus his attention when he wants to, plays that PlayStation for hours, doesn't notice a thing around him. So I know he's got the ability to focus his attention, it's just, you know, getting him to use those skills in a different area that I'm finding challenging. Now your child actually starts to believe that he can focus his attention because you talk about him like he does. You know, it can be a really good trick to kind of brainwash your child into having the skill you want by talking about it as if they already have that skill, because they generally do. You know, that one focusing their attention, they do focus their attention for hours on PlayStation. So it's not that they can't focus their attention, it's they can't focus their attention on the things you want them to focus on. So yeah, talk it up, talk it like they can already do it.
Cool. So this one's anonymous. They said, what can we do about a 4-year-old that has recently started wetting the bed every night? Right. When can we expect this to settle down?
Yeah, it's hard to know when that's going to settle down because, first of all, it's normal. You know, that we all regress a little bit during lockdown. So it's very normal for someone who's been, you know, having dry nights for a year to go backwards. You don't want to do anything punitive about it. You know, many children we find out later on have a medical issue and there's nothing that they can do about it, and that needs to be fixed medically. So you don't want to load them up with guilt about it. Quite honestly, if I had a 4-year-old that was starting to wet the bed now during this time of lockdown when everyone's under stress, I would put a nappy back on them and not make a big deal of it. And go, yeah, sweet as mate, we'll just put on a nappy, and when you're ready to have a dry night again, we can start, you know, trying to have dry nights again. It's all good. There's no hurry. Just relieve the stress. I think don't make a big deal of it and just stick a nappy on. You know, don't think of it as regression or stepping backwards, because, you know, that's just a normal part of human development. Human development, you don't really go on an upward trajectory. It's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and we expect those 1 steps backwards to be during times like this, when things are different, routines out the window. I mean, also consider that there might be something on your child's mind. Sometimes they worry about the strangest things at that age that you can't possibly comprehend what they are. So again, give the child the space and the time to talk about what are the things that concern them, yeah, and give ear to those and reassure them. Often that just, you know, helps in itself.
Great. So this is the last question from this pre-submitted section before we go to the live questions. So this one says, my 2-year-old was sleeping so well for months in his cot, and suddenly he's not. He's now sleeping with us and wakes often, usually from bad dreams and night terrors. Do you have any advice around this?
Yeah, it is, again, very normal around this age to start having nightmares and night terrors. Nightmares and night terrors are slightly different, because a night terror is when you have night terrors, the child's body's sort of woken up, but their mind often hasn't. So they are still kind of in a dream state, and they're scared about what they're seeing in their dream. Interestingly, it shows us in the research that it's not a very effective strategy to try and wake them up fully. What seems to be a much more effective strategy is just to calm them and reassure them. I mean, it's similar to the answer I gave before. I wouldn't be too concerned about the child regressing at 2 years old to not sleeping through the night. I mean, they were sleeping through the night quite early in the first place then, if you've got it all established by 2. So it's okay for them to regress. I don't think you need to fix it. I think you just need to meet their need and reassure them and cuddle them and encourage them back to sleep, because they're 2 years old, so there's really nothing else you can do. The more you reassure them and calm them and soothe them, the faster they go back to sleep. Then the quicker the problem's solved. I would just be letting them jump into your bed to reassure them at this stage, if that's convenient for you and your family and safe, because I think it is just that reassurance they need. Don't do the harden up thing, because they're 2 years old, and that's not going to harden them up. That's just going to make them less resilient and feel isolated and alone. And it will do the opposite to harden them up, actually. It will weaken them. So just support them, comfort them, nurture them, and reassure them that they're okay.
Great. So now we're going to take some questions from the live audience.
Okay.
So a few parents have concerns about toddlers being very particular about routines and not liking things out of place. Is this normal, or should this be something to keep an eye on at such a young age?
Yeah, well, at such a young age, for everything to be in order, I mean, that's a temperament type. To like things to be in order. We see some kids get their dinkies, their little cars, and they're lining them up from smallest to largest. Now, that can mean several things. We don't want to over-interpret it. It can mean that the child has a predisposition to being good at maths. I used to work on a program called Parents as First Teachers. We could visit children from birth every month for the first 3 years of their life. And I'd often see that these children very early on had this temperament type that liked order and structure. And we think, oh, he's a CEO in the making, but and that often translated that they liked that left brain maths thing. I mean, I think a lot of parents, when we look at things being in a particular order, we talk about the trait of autism. That doesn't mean, I want people to understand that autism is a normal human trait. We all like to have things ordered. It's only when that goes into the extreme that we start to talk about it as autism. So at this young age, no, I wouldn't be too concerned. If you've already noticed that there's this thing to like to do things in exact ways, I would encourage messy play as well to help balance that out. Get the goo out, let them, get into the goo and mix it all around everywhere. Finger painting, just as creative as you want to be. I mean, I remember I was very like this as a kid. My mother thought it was weird that I wanted things to be so exact, and there's no way I would play with goo or anything. I needed to be immaculately clean all the time. If I got a spot of dirt on me, I'd go inside and make sure Mum changed me. I was still going back out to play in the mud puddle, but I wanted to do it with clean clothes. I think it can just be a stage of development, and I think that's in my temperament type. It's I like things to be exact and done properly, and and I think that's been a good thing if you work with it. So yeah, I would just work with it, accept it. It's a good thing. Could be good at maths, and encourage that creative play so that you get the other balance going in as well.
Cool. So we have quite a few questions from teachers.
Okay.
So they said, do you have any tips for teachers returning to school in term 4? What strategies can we use to settle and engage the students?
Yeah, I think transition is a big part, isn't it? So as the kids are transitioning back, when they first come back, you want to establish a routine with them that does incorporate some type of self-calming technique. So I think mindfulness techniques, teachers are really used to those sorts of mindfulness techniques now. Mindfulness is really, neurologically, what's happening when we use mindfulness is we're calming the child's amygdala and re-engaging their frontal cortex. And it's really that frontal cortex that we want that's going to help them to self-calm, be engaged in the curriculum. So rather than just expect them to come into class and say, right, let's start, get your books out and do the role and think that's enough, we need to probably dedicate 10 minutes to actually really helping those kids to come into the classroom, not just physically, but mentally, spiritually, emotionally. So there's lots of different mindfulness exercises you can get off YouTube. Think creatively, think about things that work for your children, your particular children in your class, things that reflect their culture. There's lots of breathing techniques we can use. We can just take the kids through guided breathing techniques. There's, doing a bit of stretching and yoga techniques at school. But really, like I say, there's an endless number of techniques. So just go into Google and write mindfulness, for primary school kids, mindfulness exercises, and you'll find one that particularly suits, the kids you work with. I think like Catholic schools and Kura Kaupapa Māori schools have really been doing mindfulness since the beginning of time. They just didn't call it that. But when you start the day with prayer, followed by hymny, followed by hymns and stuff, that routine and regularity at a Catholic school tends to settle the children in and help to transition them into that. Same at kura kaupapa when we start, the day with karakia and waiata and mihi, the routine and regularity of that is like a mindfulness exercise in itself. And if you anchor some sort of technique in the kids, I talked about the 6-4-6 method before, that just, that takes a few seconds. If you do it for a whole minute, you completely regulate. But the research is showing just doing it once. 6 breathing, 6 seconds in, 4 seconds out, 6 seconds in. 6-4-6, that's enough to slightly calm and regulate. And if you teach the kids that technique and then remind them of that during the day, all of that will help to transition them in. I'm probably, telling you stuff you already know, but going back to the good old routine, the rituals and the things that make the child remember, oh yeah, this is how we do things at school, and we're back at school now. Reinforcing those routines and that sense of belonging. Mm-hmm.
Great. Melanie asks, how would you encourage a 12-year-old boy who has moved cities partway through the year to make friends?
He's moved cities partway through the year to make friends. If it's the first time that he's ever moved, this is probably quite a good thing for him. I did a study on creative genius early on, and what it showed was the most resilient children are children that stayed at the same school the whole time, and not that moved all of the time. The most resilient children are the children that moved once. So they seem to get the advantages of being stable from one place because they're there for a long time, but moving once encourages those children to have to initiate those new social skills and learn social skills about how to initiate contact with other people. And that then seems to serve them well for the rest of their life, that they exercise those skills. They're a bit more confident. So I think just reinforcing, helping them with strategies, talking about different ways that you can make friends, different ways that you can approach people, joining groups, and just help to give them strategies for making new friends, encourage them. Point out times when they have done that successfully. There'll be times in their life where they've made friends before. It might be on school holidays, or when you've gone on holiday and you've got friends with the kids in the caravan next door. There'll be times when they've done it. So talk about those times and talk about what was successful and what made it work, and that will just make them feel a bit more, encouraged about going into a new school.
Great. So Camilla asks, how do you deal with a 6-year-old that has selective listening and ignores a lot of things?
Oh yeah, this is difficult, isn't it? Because what is the aim here? Is to get a lot of people who say to me that their 6-year-old is ignoring them have a kind of unrealistic expectation about how much their 6-year-old should listen to them, or maybe their parenting is that they're constantly in the background going, stop doing that, stop being naughty, and not encouraging the child and constantly nagging. And then they'll say, oh, the child's not doing as they're told. So, it can be difficult. At 6, I think all you can do is the strategies we've talked about before. You have to do 99% of the work for them. If you want them to be compliant and do things, then you've got to approach them in a respectful way, you've got to have realistic expectations, and then you've got to think, well, now that I've said it, I've got to follow through on it, and I've got to help them. You shouldn't be punishing children in any way. We don't really need to punish or train children, we just need to help and socialise them. So if they're not listening, then I would suggest get more in relationship with them, that the child's learned to block you out. So stop saying things you're not going to follow through on, try and say less, and the stuff that you do say, make sure that you're prepared to take the time to follow through on it, which means getting down and helping the child to do that. That's how you get a cooperative 6-year-old. A cooperative 6-year-old is normally a 6-year-old a 6-year-old that listens to you is usually a 6-year-old that feels listened to. So if you want them, children do as you do, not as you say. So you've really got to do that thing of reflecting back their emotion again. When the 6-year-old is upset, model that empathy by reflecting back their emotions, saying, I know you feel frustrated, I know you feel overwhelmed, I know you really wanted, a biscuit before dinner, and they give them a strategy to help divert that. That's all you can do, really. There's no way of forcing them to do as they're told. You've got to sort of help them and make sure they do it, because you're doing 99% of it and they don't have a lot of choice. Then next time they do 98, next time they do 97. There's no easier way of doing that. What the literature tells us is that the 3 best ways to change a 6-year-old's behaviour, or any child's behaviour, number 1 is cognitive training. What we talked about, tell them those strategies, tell them what they can do instead, so provide a strategy. So what that means is don't tell them what not to do, tell them what to do. Right? The number 2 method is what's called induction. Induction means inducing the child into thinking it was their own idea. So, when the 6-year-old doesn't want to put his plate on the bench because he thinks that's someone else's job and he's refusing to do it, but he's fascinated with becoming a big schoolboy, then you use induction by going, oh, well, all right, you're not going to put your plate on the bench. I just thought you'd be able to do it because, big schoolboys know how to do it. But if you don't know how to do it, it's all right, I'll do it for you. Well, then he can't get his plate on the bench fast enough now that he knows it's aligned with big schoolboys. So now it's his idea, he wants to do it. So that's the second most common method. And the third most successful method is rewarding the behaviour that you do like. So rather than telling him off and complaining when he's not listening, set him up to listen, and then so that you can reward that listening, and rewarding him when he does listen is going to be far more effective than complaining when he's not. So there you go. There's the top 3 strategies according to the literature.
Great. Quinn asks, I understand using distraction as a strategy to avoid the meltdown, but when's the right age to start setting boundaries and actually explaining what they're doing is not right?
I think right from the start, explaining what they're doing. I think right from the start it's good to use language. I think explaining what they're doing is not right is not what the literature tells us to do, but using our language to explain what they are doing and what is the right thing to have done. I feel like I'm just repeating stuff from before. If there's asking when is the right age where we just go, no, okay, and put in place that boundary, it's really more to do with parenting styles. It's like, yep, you do ultimately need to put in place a boundary at some point, but it's not about taking an approach of training them or telling them cognitively why they're not allowed to do it. That's just effectively nagging, and it's not really helping the child do anything. It's kind of an old-fashioned, outdated mode of parenting. I would instead focus on your language on telling the child what you want them to do instead, and describing the behaviours that you do want. That 25% of your brain's taken up with the parietal lobe, that we call the artist lobe, because it's responsible for visualisation. So if I say don't stand on the chair, 25% of the kid's brain is picturing standing on the chair, the very behaviour I don't want. Me explaining all the reasons why he's not allowed to stand on the chair, also just keep his mind picturing standing on the chair. Whereas if I just focus on saying, sit on the chair please, and give him all the reasons why it's good to sit down on the chair, his brain is picturing the very behaviour that I want. When it comes down to I think the question behind that really is, when do you get to that point where you go, and this is the boundary and we've got to put in place. Because when we talk about the backbone style of parenting, they're not a jellyfish. There is the point where you put in place the boundary. But I would just reinforce the boundary in terms of partnership rather than punishment. I would be saying, yes, this is the boundary, and I'm going to help you to follow that boundary, and you will be successful in following that boundary, even if I've got to do 99% of it for you. You are going to be successful in that. I don't think you need to punish them into following the boundary. I think you need to help them into following the boundary. But you're right, that you do need to ensure they follow that boundary. I just think you can do that without anger, without punishment, and without even necessarily lecturing them about why they shouldn't do it.
Great. How do you manage a fussy eater or children who are refusing to eat certain foods?
Oh yeah, this is a big one, isn't it? I remember sitting at the kitchen table. I didn't like onions and scrambled eggs because it tasted too raw. And have to sit at the table, and be brought out again the next morning to give to you for breakfast because you eat what was put in front of you. That's how it was in the 1970s. I don't think that's a very good approach. They are human beings and they might not like that food. Do you know what it's like to be made to eat the food you think is disgusting? It doesn't really teach you anything. You're not learning anything from that. So if there's just particular foods that your child doesn't like, then I think you probably should respect their palate and respect their individuality and allow them to exercise that choice. Do you want to be made to eat foods that you've decided that you don't like? If it goes right across the board, the child is particularly fussy. I should say here you're talking to a very fussy eater. There's a very narrow range of things that I like to eat. So if they're fussy right across the board, the first thing I would notice is that I have, the pattern that I've noticed anecdotally, is that a lot of my friends who are now very health conscious, hippie, vegans, who only put their body as their temple and they're very conscious of dietary stuff and exercise and these kind of health fanatics, often started out as these kids that would, I know one that would only eat macaroni cheese, the processed macaroni cheese stuff. And the mother would try and make all these other things and try and get them to, but that's all the child would eat. But that sounds really unhealthy. But I mean, he had some other stuff other times. But what I'm saying is he grew up to be a super healthy, very health conscious person. So all you can do really, if the child's fussy right across the board, is remember you're the one that does the shopping. So, if their house is full up with chips and cans of Coke and that's all the kids eat, well, whose responsibility is that really? You're buying the chips and the Coke, so stop doing that. Fill the house up with things that are more likely for the child to eat. Give them more options and alternatives. Look at other types of foods, other types of textures, so you can try and get healthy foods in that they do like, and limit the amount of treats that are available. I just have lots of parents who say to me, "Oh, my teenager will only eat pies and chippies, and what can I do?" And it's like, stop buying pies and chippies, and they'll get hungry enough. If you put decent food in the cupboards, they'll start eating that.
Great. We have a question from Rachel. She asks, how do you deal with an adolescent that has started keeping things from us, hiding things and actions?
Right, yeah, difficult, eh? They're starting to keep secrets, and that is a danger zone. It's also kind of typical and normal that they want to have some of their own privacy or some of their own sense of adulthood at this age. That's an understandable need to have, but you also have the need to have to protect them. So yeah, I'd said to my kids, that really they didn't have a lot of privacy as teenagers because it was my need to protect them. So that I had to have the passcode for their social media and their internet stuff, because any privacy they thought they had around that was an illusion, because they'd never had that privacy in the first place, because that's called being 18 and being an adult, and until then it's my job to keep you safe. So I know that's like a double barrel answer. I'm saying some of it's normal that they want to start doing that, but it's also normal that you need to protect them. So I would find some way that they can be treated more like a grown-up with some responsibility, but still with a safeguard around it. This can be a good place where godparents come in. Someone that the child's is outside the parent thing, but is a bit as trusted. Then you can set up some sort of system whereby their godparent is the backup for this. So that can be kept private from the parents, but the godparent's there to alert the parents if there is something they do need to know. So the child knows they've got a level of privacy, but only the level of privacy that a child can have. There's still going to be safety structures in and around there. I think if they're starting to keep secrets from you, it can also be that they don't feel like their voice is heard and they're not going to be listened to. So I again would go, actually, rather than doing anything punitive, I would go back to that mate date thing. If they're not telling you things and they're keeping a secret, then they're maybe giving them an opportunity to speak without fear of consequences or being corrected or told they're wrong, might actually counteract that ability to need to keep secrets. Yeah, that'd be my best advice. I think it's good to be really clear with them that it is your job to protect them, and that secrets aren't good. Surprises are good. You can go and tell your godmother about it and us not know about it. That's okay, because then it's a surprise. But something that's kept secret from everybody at your age is just really setting up to be put in a dangerous situation. And we wouldn't be being very good parents if we allowed that to happen.
Great. So some parents asked, how should we approach competitive siblings, especially when constant arguments escalate into physical fights?
Yeah, I often have a tinge of guilt when I hear this one, because my two youngest fought more than any other kids I ever known in my whole life. And I would think, geez, I'm not teaching people strategies for this. My own two kids are the worst at it. What reassured me actually from the literature was that the worst aggression you will get between siblings is when there's a 2-year age gap. If you have 18 months or less, they tend to operate more like twins and be a bit more cooperative. So they do fight, but just not as often. If there's a 3-year age gap or more, there's enough of a developmental difference that they're kind of in different developmental zones, so they don't compete as much. But if there's a 2-year age gap, that's just the perfect zone to be in complete competition about everything. Who's sitting in the front seat and who hugs dad first when he gets through the door, and that constant competition and rivalry is, really taxing and hard to put up with. Strategies that I found useful. Boarding school. No, that's a joke. No, can't just choose boarding school. I found giving them solutions, rather than just complaining. So a lot of the fights were about the television remote and who had turns on what. So I would come in and use that cognitive training thing, give them a strategy. Come in and say something like, oh, for goodness sake, there's a clock on the wall. You could just have a half-hour program each and work it out that way. It'd be good to come in and find out that you've, used your brains and worked out a system that's fair, so I don't have to come in and sort this out. That way I'm encouraging them to come up with their own system. I mean, like I said for the other things, it might be that for a start you've got to do 99% of it. So you come in and say, right, well, this is the system we're going to use. You're going to have the TV for half an hour and you're going to have the TV for half an hour. I found that strategy worked because it gave them something fair. They had to start negotiating because this one wanted, their program was 40 minutes long, so they needed to take 10 minutes to the next person, so they had to start negotiating. That worked well. To be honest though, there were times during school holidays, I imagine especially during lockdown, where I actually just zoned off different parts of the house and said, you stay over there and you stay over there because I just need a day of peace and no fighting. And I think that's not a bad thing, to give them time and space apart and the opportunity not to be fighting. The only other thing I found that really worked and seemed to stop the sibling rivalry and bring them together and make them tight as a unit is when they combined their powers, when they combined their hatred of me. So if I did something that really annoyed both of them, suddenly they were best mates because they were against Dad. But yeah, I don't know if that's the best strategy, but that's the other one that worked too. So if you need to, especially during lockdown, actually segregate some areas of the house and say, this is your area of the house, this is your area of the house. If they're going to be in a space together in the TV lounge, then give them some strategies to help make that work. Yeah, but I wouldn't try and get into being judge between them. You never know. Don't come in and try and judge situations that you didn't previously see, because you just don't know, what's really happened. And children will, I caught my youngest daughter once doing the whole, she didn't know I was watching, and then did the whole suddenly scream as if she had been hit and start crying and saying her brother had hit her. Whereas actually, and I believed that every time before I saw her do the whole performance and knew it was a complete lie. So it taught me, she was like 4 or 5, it taught me that not to go in and try and judge the situation and just assume the older one's picking on the younger one, because it could be the younger one playing the older one. Don't try and solve it, what's happened, give them strategies for what to do next time.
Great. And now it's the final question for the night. So Cherie says, our 14-year-old is wanting to have sleepovers with her new friends, but is refusing to let us meet their parents or provide any contact details or addresses. She wants us to stay out of her business, but we still need to keep her safe. Help.
Yes. It's a great question to finish on. It's I think you're absolutely right to be concerned. It refers back to what I said before. I think there's got to be a conversation with that 14-year-old to let her know her expectation of freedom and the way she's going to be treated as an adult is completely unrealistic. She's asking for 18-year-old behaviours at 14, and it's not even really, I'd expect to explain to the child, that's not even fulfilling my legal responsibilities as a parent. And I'm kind of aiming for more than just legal responsibilities. I'm trying to do a good job. It would be irresponsible for me as a parent to let you at 14 go away to people's places that I don't know and be in places where I don't know where you are. That puts you completely unsafe. There's just no way I can be a good, competent parent and do that. So I think you're right to stick to your guns. Again, I don't want to be punitive. We just want to explain to the child that realistically is not going to happen. That's just not going to happen at 14. So we need to find another way for you to feel like you've got some sense of freedom and some ability to choose your friends. Maybe we can talk about how we approach the other parents so that it's not in a way that's going to be deadly embarrassing to you. But we do definitely need to be talking to the parents of where you're going to stay. Like I said about that backbone style of parenting, that backbone style of parenting is flexible and responsive, but a backbone gives you structure and support, and there's clear boundaries that you don't cross over. And I say that would be one of those. So if you're going to go stay at a friend's house, we do need to talk to the parents. So stick to your guns. You're doing the right thing. Okay then, we've come to the very end. So, firstly, just a huge thanks to all of you for tuning in and supporting. Just the fact that you're online here trying to find some strategies to help your child through actually already puts your child in a category of children that are less likely to run into trouble because they've got parents that are seeking support and seeking out parent education. So good on you for being here. A huge mihi to, of course, NIB for making it all happen sponsoring tonight and doing the Facebook Live. Remember, you can go and check out all the resources we've made with them, because it is Mental Health Week this week as well. So, we're sort of thinking about people that are dealing with mental health issues all the time. And now we've got lockdown on top of that, so that adds pressure for people. So use those resources at nib.co.nz. Follow their Facebook page and do a like there. Thanks to Serena in the background there for collating all those questions, and all of you for joining us. And I'll just leave you with this one thought for the night. a lot of what we talked about tonight is about the ability to nurture and care for children rather than just discipline them and teach them. I like the idea that that word discipline comes from the word disciple. You didn't get a whole lot of Jesus putting people in timeout or hitting them. So it was very much about leading by example and that caring, nurturing nature. So a saying that's really common amongst teachers, and one of my favourites, you probably heard it before, but I'll finish there, is children don't care what you know until children know that you care. Which is it all, really? Kia ora koutou katoa, ka mihi nui kia koutou. Good night.